Hey, Jenny, Ms. Jenny, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Greg. How are you? It's good to see you.
Well, doing okay, all things considered. Just trying to get inspired here. Listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony just before getting on the call. So need a little bit of joy in that fourth section or piece. Ode to Joy gets me fired up every time. So
Oh, nice. Yeah, great way to set the pace.
that's right. That's right. So, well, welcome everyone to the Friday weekly edition of Making Sense with Move to Amend. Why don't we just introduce ourselves? I'm Greg Coleridge, the Outreach Director here in beautiful and quite warm Northeast Ohio.
And I'm Jennie Spanos, she, her. I am in Pensacola, Florida. I'm working as a national fellow to Move to Amend's national team, and honored to be here with you today.
Well, and we are honored to be with those of you who have been loyal and or maybe this is the first time. And so just before beginning, I wanted to acknowledge Alfonso behind the scenes who keeps us in check and does all of the necessary electronic wizardry to make sure that we are here, and we'll have a number of items coming along the bottom of your screen to remind you of opportunities to participate and to share with us any particularly important comments made. So thanks so much to him. And again, welcome to you. And for those of you who may be new to Move to Amend, you may be curious about what this outfit is all about. We are an 11-year-old organization, got started on the very day of the anniversary of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision back in January 2010, but very much more than simply trying to reverse that odious Supreme Court decision. We're all about trying to bring about real, authentic democracy in all of its forms, focusing, though, sort of as a first initial stepping stone on what we call the We the People Amendment to abolish never intended inalienable constitutional rights for corporations, as well as the equally bizarre constitutional doctrine of money equaling free, First Amendment protected free speech. But we use as a stepping stone internally our work based on important principles that is not just focused on that sort of amendment in isolation, but internally feeling that we'll never have authentic democracy unless we have attention and reversal of the historic and systemic multiple forms of oppression in our society and injustice that have been directed from day one. Just so many constituencies that to this day are still fighting for authentic inclusion and voices to be heard and dignity to be respected. And we also focus very much on part of this program is geared to authentic political education, getting on the other side of the learning curve, becoming aware of maybe what you, certainly I, wasn't aware of growing up in operating in this culture in which the powerful few dominate what is said, what is sort of projected as acceptable thought. And so many other principles of organizing at the grassroots and forming coalitions and building a movement that is broad and deep and is inclusive and is small d democratic, inclusive of people of all stripes and including people of all political ideologies, so long as they subscribe to basic senses of justice, peace, and nonviolence, and bringing about fundamental change for the good to people and to the planet. So, with that, wow, what a week, huh?
Yes. I don't know. What are the few things that you saw this week that really relate to corporate rule and caught your attention?
Well,
I
maybe
don't
we
know.
should start at the top with maybe the most exciting development that you might want to share. Something that happened Monday in Congress that we had a wee bit hand in evolving.
You must be talking about the reintroduction of HJR 48. The We the People introduction was reintroduced by House Representative Pramila Jayapal with 50 initial co-sponsors, which is amazing and awesome. Our goal is to have 100 more within this month. There's activists, affiliates all across the nation that have scheduled meetings with the representatives to get them aware of it if they're not yet, or to bring it back to the front forum and to bring them on as co-sponsors. Of course, this wouldn't happen without the grassroots leadership of our affiliates and national team. It's fundamental to changing what has turned into corporate rule in our country. And for the People Act is merely a law, and of course, Democracy for All, the HJR 1, while amendment is only partial, solutions must be equal to the size of the problem. There's no equivalent protections in HJR 1 to corporate personhood, for example. It doesn't address that at all.
Right. Yeah, and HJR 1 sort of barely, if you kind of sniff it out, barely, there's some feeble reference to it, but it's pretty partial and is quite weak. So ours is much more fundamental, both in terms of it being more than simply a law and more than the Democracy for All amendment when it comes to constitutional amendments. So we're pretty excited about it. And as Jenny said, we have 50 people already initially on board, and we're looking for at least another 50 here in the near future. So thanks to all of you who have been had a hand in garnering those first 50 initial co-sponsors and or may be involved in helping secure the next 50 at least that we're looking to add here over the next month or so. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about how you can become more involved in trying to arm twist gently your congressional representative into becoming a co-sponsor. We're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to getting more folks on. This is what we see as dealing with the root problem that of all the issues that we're facing.
Yeah, and what we deal with week to week are so many issues that, guess what, do have a connection to either big money in politics or the ability of corporate entities to sort of hijack what were never intentional powers that are overwhelming our power to make decisions affecting our own lives and our families, our communities, and certainly the environment around us. So, it's just so connected to so many issues and so fundamental, and we just think is proportional in size and scale to what all the multitude of problems we're dealing with. So it's not the only solution out there. It's not the only piece. It's not in of itself any kind of magic bullet all by itself, but it certainly is a big piece. There are a lot of other fundamental problems and changes that need to occur constitutionally and culturally along with it. But it's a pretty darn large piece of it and would serve as a pretty important springboard to some of these, to complement or supplement so many other things fundamentally that need to be changed and that we think explains so many of the problems that are out there. So
absolutely.
Thanks for being
what about what's happening in Bessemer?
We were hoping as we were planning this call today that maybe it was I don't know, just unfair or unrealistic, but we had our high hopes that what we were going to talk about in Amazon, the facility down in Alabama, would be sort of our concluding good news piece. But unfortunately, it has not turned out that way. For those of you who have been following this, the strike at this extremely large plant, unlike any of its equivalent size, at least in that part of the country and certainly in the South, high hopes that this would become the first unionized facility of scale of Amazon. And it just didn't quite turn out to be that way. Nearly 800 employees said no to forming the company's first union. And some of it, when you look at it in retrospect and even going in, it was going to be a tough haul given some factors that, quite honestly, are create an unfair political and organizing playing field. The maybe biggest one of which is, right from the start, Amazon launches, this oppositional campaign where they bring in nationally known anti-union, union buster consultants, pay them exorbitant wages, have a whole, army of people come in, and then they have, people at their beck and call when they are on the job. The moment you step as a citizen or as an individual from the public sidewalk onto corporate property, any corporate property, so long Bill of Rights, you lose all of them, including, in this case, your right to free speech and right of assembly. Not so. For corporations, it's just the opposite. They, they have, all of their rights that they use. They can be not just sort of trying to be equal partners, but they are dominant. They are authoritarian on corporate property. They call the shots, totally.
All the shots.
And that's certainly what they did here in pretty much, doing everything in having posters all over the warehouse, some of them in bathroom stalls, forcing workers to attend multiple meetings during their shifts. Whereas, workers couldn't take time off the shifts even to go to the bathroom without being docked, but they certainly could be called off their shifts to hear the propaganda and the threats and the intimidation. And so all of that, basically added up to, in the end, and there were other factors, of course, but to this loss. So, what are the takeaways from this? How do we kind of make sense of it all? Well, just to reiterate, obviously an unreal and unfair political playing field. Corporations have total access to workers, whereas workers basically have no access, no freedom to try to connect with their peers, to share the reasons for advantages, to share their stories of being treated unjustly, of which there were many reasons, many legitimate reasons for how people were, treated definitely unfairly, unjustly, inhumanely on the job. And bottom line is larger context is courts in general. If you try to say, well, I'm going to go to court, go to the National Labor Relations Board, or take this to various courts, those entities these days over the last 20 years, 30 years, even before the current Roberts Court, when you're talking about Supreme Court or lower courts, very anti-union. And LRB, National Labor Relations Board, they're supposed to be for labor at best, particularly under Trump and even under Democrats, have been neutral, but sometimes they've tilted even to be, slightly pro-corporate. And then there's the incredible economic power that Amazon and those kinds of corporations have. Look, you don't like this, you're talking about organizing a union, you're gone, you're out of here if you keep talking that way. There's plenty of other people that could do your job.
Right.
So, all of this just basically screams for greater labor laws, certainly the types that existed prior to the Taft-Hartley Act back in 1947. But once that law went into effect, it's been tilted very much against labor. But recently, in fact, yesterday, ironically, there was a national call by the AFL-CIO to call your senators in support of what's called the PRO Act, PRO being protecting the right to organize. That is a historic piece of legislation that would make more workers eligible for collective bargaining, make unions easier to organize, limit the power of management to sabotage the process, like in part what went on there in Bessemer, and to punish those who do more harshly and deliver speedier contracts and lend existing unions more muscle. So all of that would be to good. And if that would have already been the law at the time this campaign was waged, who knows? The results would have been different. But finally, a negative, and what makes certainly sense for what happened is, again, these companies, they wage to make sure the laws are pro-corporate and anti-union by using their political First Amendment free speech muscle to lobby and to contribute or donate to political candidates, forcing labor to try to, stay even that political playing field by, raising money to spend on political campaigns, which by definition, guess what? Diverts funds that could be used for organizing. So all of that collectively makes, I guess, in a sense, what happened sadly in Alabama predictable.
Understandable. Yeah. Well, I mean, things aren't going to change with that. I mean, they're pushing to something like 18 new anti-protest laws were introduced at the beginning of this year, from everywhere. Well, Arizona, Florida, Indiana, Minnesota, Mississippi, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Rhode Island. These are concerted efforts to stop people from raising their voices, workers, voters, individuals. In January, too, in your home state, Ohio, Governor Mike DeWine,
Oh, yeah.
he signed in that law to raise penalties for trespassing on oil and gas sites from a month to up to 6 months, from $250 in fines to up to $1,000 in fines for stepping on oil and gas properties. The bill also raised penalties for improperly tampering with oil and gas infrastructure, a crime not, a crime punishable already up to 5 years in prison. This week, activists in Florida have gone to Tallahassee to stand against passing of one of those bills, HB1 and SB 484. It's DeSantis's heinous attempt to criminalize protesters. The bill actually incentivizes violence against protesters by creating an affirmative defense for vigilantes, excuse me, to avoid civil liberty damages when they kill or injure protesters. So essentially, they can drive into us, shoot us, otherwise assault us, shielding counter protesters from any civil liability. If they kill or injure protesters, is going to undoubtedly lead to more violence and embolden the white nationalists and other racists. It's essentially a civil license to kill. And it doesn't stop there. It also holds people in jail without the possibility of bail for protesting. You think that's going to be a deterrent to, raising your voice? It's also in direct affront to millions calling for racial equality, which is what started all these bills. The bill protects Confederate monuments, not individuals, not voters, but monuments. It makes it a felony to take down a racist flag, or up to 15 years in prison. That's just a few of the atrocities. But also under his anti-protest bill, any person who participates in a peaceful protest that turns violent through no fault of their own could be arrested and charged with a third-degree felony. That means a peaceful protester could lose their right to vote and be locked up in a cage for 5 years because they attended an otherwise peaceful protest where people did something wrong. If they were among the 10 protesters, they could face up to 15 years in prison, the same as someone charged with sexual assault. There's nothing more chilling in speech than the prospect of being locked up for just speaking your values.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who does that benefit?
Yeah, who's the benefit? Yeah. This is happening in probably many of the states that people are, who are tuning in today. I see Paul. Hey, Paul, in Texas, some of the same stuff's probably happening there. It certainly is in many other places, and some of it is actually, sadly, quite predictable. The power elite knows that their policies that are becoming less popular are going to result in resistance. And so what do you do in that case? You disempower people every way possible. You try to eliminate the tools, the strategies, the tactics, the methods of resistance, intimidate people, try to chill them into being afraid to come out and protest in a variety of different ways. So in a sense, it's the only difference is that this is so much more blatant than the things like what they have been done, by criminalizing democracy while you're, legalizing bribery and corporate control. They were able to sort of do that sort of quietly, sort of the one step at a time, and things that are you don't even pay attention to, don't even notice, and before you do notice, you've lost a lot of your rights. Certainly in the courts, that's how they've operated. But now that those kinds of policies have become so, anti-person, anti-democratic, anti-just, anti-environment, that people are rising up. And all these movements, from civil rights to, rights of nature to, more democracy to healthcare, you name it. So in a sense, entirely predictable, but still have got to be resisted. So I don't know, you mentioned there in Florida, something's going on. Tomorrow, there's a big thing all over Ohio. Maybe tomorrow is actually being used in coordination all over the country. So do check in your state to see if something's going on there.
Yeah, we can't diminish protests over this. We need to elevate them and come out in droves to support folks that are out there on the front lines, raising their voices and letting our will be heard.
I see Fernanda in the chat says, wow, these laws are insane. Thanks for covering the news on this. This coupled with the AI technology involving to track protesters feel like an official dystopia. Yeah.
They're not even hiding it.
Yeah, the one sort of funny thing, maybe not quite so funny, but maybe ironic, is there was the AI technology. What was it, last year or the year before, they started to employ to do all this facial recognition, and in response, people, a lot of younger people started to wear face coverings, and then in response to that, there were laws saying you're not allowed to wear face coverings.
Masks, right?
And then the pandemic hit. So now people are wearing, face masks, which of course are now sanctioned. You're supposed to be doing that. And if you wear, sunglasses, they have not a clue who you are. So for people who can get away doing that, all to the good. We'll see how much longer that goes. But that is just one of many ways that, of course, people are being tracked. And of course, social media is a mechanism for tracking protest, and just all sorts of techniques. So, it's a cat and mouse. As that kind of stuff happens, people on, the resistance side feels and finds out ways to do an end run around it, and, counters it. And so it's just this, dangerous, but certainly extremely important chess match.
Very important. Karen in the chat said, we are all following voting election initiatives and redistricting bills in Oregon. We have a real good system. And in a time of COVID, we track and submit testimony online. Yep. Speaking of voter suppression efforts, we've seen plenty of those this week. Glad Oregon has their eye on it.
Hey, just before going, just wanted to acknowledge a couple of people. Dennis. Hey, you, Jenny. Dennis Dyke and Judith in California. Greetings. Working on trying to get Zoe Lofgren. I don't know where that stands, but I know you have been, and your compatriots there were successful in the 116th congressional session to bring her on board. So good kudos to you there, and stay with it. Persistence is half, if not more, of the battle, because the powers to be, certainly in every kind of reaction of the powers to be, a tried and true method is to sit on their hands and to wait you out and to just hope that people just get tired and go away. So it's important that we do not stop, but just outwait them and say, nope, we're not going away. You have to deal with us. And we're certainly even more persistent. And what do they say? Oftentimes the most annoying thing is a mosquito. Well, we're much more annoying than that. So we're at it. So thanks so much, Judith, for all your efforts.
Yes, thank you, Judith.
So what's next?
How about What do you think about McConnell's demands that corporations silence uh,
Oh
that
yeah,
the
yeah.
corporations be silent on their voter suppression efforts?
It's kind of a big week.
How ironic.
Yeah, it's a big week in a lot of different ways. With HAR 48, with we haven't even talked about the what's going on in the trial up in Minnesota over the George Floyd killing. I mean, just a lot. But one of the other big issues going on is sort of a multitude of issues related around corporations and corporations speaking out and the reaction and resistance to that speaking out by our friends on the political right, including our friend Mitch McConnell, who this week came out and was just appalled at corporate America speaking out over the voter suppression laws in general, but in particular in Georgia. With him, I guess I didn't see him make the statement, but I'm assuming he actually did this with a straight face. Said
The hypocrisy.
in response to the scores of corporations speaking out against voting suppression, he said, quote, my advice to the corporate CEOs of America is to stay out of politics. Don't pick sides in these big fights, unquote. Really, Mitch? Were you guest host at Saturday Night Live or what? I mean, this is just unbelievable. As much as maybe any human being on the planet, at least in this country, this guy has defended the role of corporate cash and has, had his hat in hand, if not for his own campaign, then certainly when he was majority leader, to just rake it in from corporate America for, Republicans and, he being the head of the party in the Senate for the senatorial committee, and to just rake in all this money to just, turn around and, flush it out to all of these senators by the tens and collectively, not even tens of millions, but in the 2016 race, a couple hundred millions of dollars. And so here he is on the one hand saying he's against corporations sharing their metaphorical 2 cents, i.e., their views, their opinions, their words, but not their $2,000 or their 20 grand or their 200 grand when it comes to a different kind of speech. That
Keep those donations coming.
That's right. Keep that money in politics coming, that corporate free speech. That he has no problems with. In fact, don't just speak out, but scream. Continue to scream. Pour in that money. We love that kind of speaking. And so, it's just unbelievable how when it suits him, he is all for one type of speech, but when he is doesn't suit him and serves the purpose of the minority party and the minority views that are trying to bring about Jim Crow 2.0 in such a blatant and obvious manner, then quiet. We don't want to hear from you. Just like they don't want to hear from people of color and low income people and students and seniors and low income people when it comes to going to the polls or when it comes to trying to lobby their congressperson for any number of issues that don't happen, which is the result and the reason why there's such a humongous disconnect between what people want on issue after issue and the kinds of policies we have or don't have, because our voices mean nothing, because that kind of voice in the current political reality means nothing. It's only
the money. Enough dollar signs with that voice.
Only the dollar sign. Yeah. So anyway, sort of a variation on that theme was another issue that came out this week. It was a report from Public Citizen that's very insightful, very enlightening, very disturbing, entitled "The Corporate Sponsors of Voter Suppression." Here we are again. I know corporations are not people, but if they were, my God, what two-faced they would be. On the one hand, here they are supposedly, though a little late after the fact, coming out and saying, oh, these voter suppression laws in Georgia, as Coca-Cola Corporation, Delta Airlines Corporations, and so many others, again, after the fact, came out and spoke disparagingly against it. But yet, these same corporations and many of their peers that by the dozens came out and have riddled the Georgia voter suppression law have for a number of years, when it was convenient, have been funding voter suppression supporters at the state level by the scores. And currently we're dealing with upwards of over 360 bills in something like 47 states, and 3/4 of the companies that supposedly and have been tracked as those that stopped giving money to representatives following the insurrection that were questioning the validity of the 2020 elections. Those same corporations have been weighing in and giving money to voter suppression bills. So corporations have contributed $50 million since 2019, according to this report, to state legislators supporting voter suppression bills, including $22 million alone during the 2020 election. And just to name names, we're talking about the likes of the biggest ones being AT&T Corporation, Philip Morris Corporation, Comcast Corporation, United Health Group Corporation, our friends at Walmart Corporation, State Farm Corporation, and Pfizer Corporation. More than 60 corporations have contributed more than $100,000, as well as various trade groups. So these would be like the dairy industry, the steel industry, the medical industry. So not just individual companies, but collection of companies that represent certain sectors of the economy, banking, corporate, finance, corporate, the finance industry, etc. So, here again, what do we make sense of all of this? Well, sort of the hypocrisy of it. When it's convenient, when it works for them, then the corporate entities are all for, weighing in and being supportive of laws and rules. But when it is, against them, then they do not. Sort of the consistency in all of this. On the one hand, it's hypocritical. On another hand, it's iron solid, rock solid, ironclad consistent in that these entities are concerned with one point and one point alone, and that's their bottom line. And it's not their role, ultimately, but ours, to determine public policies. These entities shouldn't be weighing in one way or the other on any public policy, whether it's speaking out via press release or trying to weigh in through lobbying or campaign contribution. Historically, the role of corporations, as it was from day one in this country, were basically three things through corporate charters. It was to provide useful goods and services, number one, to obey all laws, number two, and to, sort of be decent public servants to meet the needs of society, period. They were not allowed to be involved in public policy formation. My God, they weren't even allowed or permitted through their charter to be involved in charitable activities. It's time for us to take charge of our legal creations, and that's what corporations are.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like good old day talk right there. I'm sure that's not what was meant by making America great again. Their corporations were checked and and had an objective of public good, producing goods and services.
Yep.
But the idea, I think the notion now is like the National Review article that came out about why not fewer voters. The republic would be better serving if we had fewer but better voters. The type of push that that's reminiscent of old Jim Crow laws and apartheid, South Africa after apartheid.
Yeah, maybe Alfonso can put the link to this. This was an article in National Review, which is, been sort of, I guess one could say, quote unquote, a principled conservative
position.
Yeah, journal that's been around, gosh, for decades, but have gone completely off the deep end on this one in saying, sort of with a straight face, maybe the problem isn't only the number of voters, that's what voter suppression laws are about, but about the quality of voters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Certain
everybody.
education level. They need to, have an understanding of politics. Can't let those poor ignorant people that, aren't running multi-million-dollar businesses and decide what they do with their lives or how their representatives are going to how they're going to represent them.
Yeah, we can't have all that political riffraff out there. All those people of color and low-income people and students. And it's like the good old days, right? Where women couldn't vote. What do they know about anything, right? Yeah, as George says, let's bring back poll taxes where, you got to have some kind of sort of threshold above which, poll taxes and constitutional, what did they call them? Literacy tests. You gotta be able to know who the First Amendment, what the First Amendment is, and who was the first president, and what about all those white guys and stuff like that. So let's create this bar again. So it's not only suppressing people. Well, this is a different form of suppression, but in terms of high quality, let's get the good stock of people in our society to be only those who vote. Unbelievable.
Right. And they have to have the right paperwork, can't they need to have their papers to be able to participate in the process. And their argument is ruled by the masses would get us in all kinds of trouble.
That's right. Yep. That's right. That's what it sounds like. And
but at least they're not hiding it anymore.
That's right. Yeah. Well, again, in a sense, it's good. Somebody once told me that a person with a gun, they are the most powerful when they don't have to use it. The mere sense that they have a gun and they don't have to use it and they get what they want, that's the ultimate form of power. When they actually have to use it, okay, they're using it and they're causing harm, maybe extreme harm, violence, injury, maybe even death. So that is certainly a form of power, but it's not as powerful because they've used it and thus they have shown their power. And so it's much more effective when you can get what you want and not have to show it. Mm-hmm. When you are powerful and you come across as being, I'm just one of them. When you actually have to show you have power, you no longer, you've sort of been smoked out. And I think what we're seeing now in so many things, this example, what you talked about before, Jenny, about, all of these anti-protest bills are instances where the power structure that for so long has been trying to convey a sense of, this is a democracy and every voice does count. And, every person does have First Amendment, free speech rights and peaceful assembly and all that is being shown for what it is. Bullshit, right?
Right.
And so it is demasking that. And so it is showing, in a sense, their true colors, their true ism, and it's a blatant abuse. And it is making, obviously it is a form of weakness, and it gives us an opportunity to use those examples as educational opportunities and organizing opportunities. It's not as democratic, my friends, as we think it is. Right.
And they're blatantly showing how important your right to vote is. I mean, even in Georgia with the voting laws recently, I know there's been a lot of focus on the fact that, they're making these big long lines, and then if you bring somebody water, but that's just it's just a chip of the problems that they're causing. That's something to sink your teeth into when you're like, oh, this is insanity. Some of the other stuff is my eyes glaze over, but it's those details that really matter and really count when it comes to exercising a right in a democracy to vote.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Just going back real quick, Amy, when we were commenting about the companies, Coke and the like, Delta Coca-Cola speaking out in Georgia, yet for years they have funded voter suppression legislators. You would know probably, or anybody who's more in tune with those in Georgia, if that is in fact true in Georgia. But yeah, overall, that has certainly been the case. Man, how legit is that? How democratic is that? And so, there's a little danger, is there not? I think by getting into the mindset of, we need to depend on them to speak powerfully for us. Forget it. Because yes, they are speaking powerfully, but most of the time, 95% of the time, it's for their own interests. And when the other 5% of the time, it's perceived, like in this case, that, wow, they're kind of supporting us, it's actually only because they're worried about losing consumer share, right? Coca's worried about losing market share to Pepsi, or Delta is worried about losing, market share to United or whatever. And so, consumer boycott, they're worried about that. They're not really concerned about this. It's only the perception of it that it makes things look bad. And it's going over, again, when something's overboard.
Well, it's great advertising for him too, to stand up against these voter suppression laws, which, more power to them. I'd rather they were getting that kind of advertisement than, child slavery, for example, in Nestle's case.
But in the same way, Jenny, is over the summer. Remember, after the killing of George Floyd, all the commercials that came out by all these companies that were projecting themselves as being, promoting civil rights and having people of color being spokespersons, or, creating foundations that were going to, help people in communities and all. And all right, as far as it goes, it's good. But a lot of it is just, again, it's PR ultimately. And it's trying to, again, create a face that they are, quote unquote, good corporate citizens. Memo to them: you are not a citizen, whether good, bad, or neutral, period. You are a creation, a legal fiction, a creation of us. And your job is to provide goods and services, to obey all laws, to generally, do what we tell you to do. You are not about, and should not be about, the business of acting independently and trying to be a citizen, good, bad, or neutral. That should be beyond your legal authority. We are people. We do the defining, as it once was. You are in the business to take, the instructions from us, period. And the We the People amendment would be a step back toward what was at one time the default, the given, what it should be.
Absolutely. And, when you're talking about a lot of money, which, a lot of the things that we're moving into is going to happen. But this $2 trillion infrastructure idea, for example, I mean, it's super popular, but we're so divided as a country that if it's put up by the Democrats, we're not going to support it, or vice versa. And a good idea is a good idea. Economists at Georgetown University estimate that the $1.5 trillion infrastructure investment could really create 15 million new clean jobs. A poll found that 78% of Americans support that government overhaul of American roadways, bridges, ports. We just had a recent bridge collapse in Chattanooga this week. Our infrastructure is literally crumbling before our very eyes. So I'm glad at least 79% of Americans support that. 71% support a plan to extend the high-speed rail, high-speed internet to all Americans, which, why don't we have that? Why can't we have good, nice stuff? It seems like the good stuff is not for us anymore. And I don't understand it. 68% supported initiatives to replace every lead pipe in the country. That's great support. Why can't we get these things done? 66 support tax credits for renewable energy. Americans really support pay for the massive infrastructure bill, but according to the poll, only 60% of adults support a tax hike on large corporations and large businesses. I mean, these corporations aren't paying a dime. Why should they not pay their taxes? 56 support ending tax breaks for fossil fuel industries. Only 56% support that. to me, that seems like a given. Why not put those tax breaks and incentives towards renewable, clean energy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is just a massive, it's the next big deal coming from Congress. And, one can argue about the size, and certainly many, I think, make a compelling case for the fact that it's not big enough. But certainly the rhetoric we're seeing come out of Congress, not just on the, from progressives or left-leaning populists, but even from, people who are, sort of mainstream Democrats, even some sort of moderate Republicans, even Trump, talked about we need stimulus, for infrastructure. We need infrastructure. We have to go big. So, I mean, that whole rhetoric of going big, there is something to be said for that. Certainly, again, reflecting what the We the People Amendment is, we believe it is going big to address some of the big fundamental problems of lack of democracy and lack of fundamental attention to economic justice, to having a survivable, livable planet. So many other things is true. But there's some problems with this infrastructure bill, that's coming. Certainly, it's not big enough to address all that is required to deal with not just when you think of infrastructure, oftentimes you just think of physical infrastructure. But people in the past have spoken about infrastructure as being human as well. What good is
Absolutely.
a built bridge if you have a broken person? If you have people who have a broken mind, spirit, or body, we have to give attention fundamentally, in dare I say the word bigly, to dealing with healthcare and education and so many of the other basic human needs that constitute human infrastructure. And even the physical part, this is where the corporate powers weigh in. A lot of it is just underscoring bad policies and, antiquated things that are like going back to in some cases, going back to the 50s. Do we really need to be repairing roads when maybe we should be trying to convert roadways that serve, polluting automobiles, and even, even electric vehicles? Where's all that electricity come from? Ultimately, it's coming from fossil fuels if you just go back far enough, into mass transit. Here is the opportunity to have, major investment in sort of mass transit trains and the like. That were you can tell the oil corporations no question, the oil corporations, the automobile corporations are going to be pushing like heck. The roadway and the bridge reconstruction. Obviously, some of those things need to happen, but shouldn't this be an opportunity to rethink fundamentally what do we need about physical infrastructure that will create a more sustainable, livable planet? And in part, that doesn't promote more suburbia, which is what the whole roadway and automobile did.
Right. And we can build infrastructure along existing paths. Magnetic levitational trains. We're the only ones without one. Why do we not have this kind of thing? And again, it goes back to corporate rule and the powers that the fossil fuel industries wield over our country. But part of the problem, we talk about these big high ticket items and big dollar items, is how do we protect that money and make sure it's going into things that we need? Infrastructure, cleaning up our waterways and our pipe systems and doing all this. There's like McKinsey, for example. There's an article that came out recently talking about how easy it is for all of the money to get sucked up for contractors and consultants. And how do we make sure that we're spending the amount of money on things that don't go just to corruption and waste? How do we get to a place where it's not being, siphoned off from these big multinational corporations? For example, Puerto Rico spent a mind-boggling amount of money, $1.5 billion on professional services, meaning attorneys, bankers, consultants. That money could have actually went in to help the people of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I mean, you just see, again, our whole system is structured such right now to where it may not be possible to efficiently, non-corruptly spend so quickly that amount of money through this pipeline when we don't have the structures in place to monitor, to oversee, to ensure that some of these dollars go for minority contractors. Are there, entities out there? What kind of cooperative businesses are there? Should we not trying to help and underscore and support those cooperative enterprises that are involved in any way, shape, or form in doing this kind of construction? At whatever scale that can be done. We're just missing a grand opportunity to do things, not just at the end to create something that we think is needed to convert our economy from a fossil fuel, individualistic, atomistic one to one that is more sustainable and more concentrated, that in a sense reflects the only way we're going to make it survivability, and to get an energy system that, again, focuses more on conservation and high tech to the extent that we can, low tech as much as possible, but high tech to the extent of helping conserve energy and do it in a way that is going to promote clean energy, and do it in ways that can support local businesses, and do it as democratically as we can, with as great oversight as we can.
Yeah, and we do have lessons that we can take from Roosevelt's New Deal. He was very effective of actually putting together building infrastructure and not just sending it out to the monopolies. He said no, and he had the government build a lot of the stuff. Take Tennessee Valley Authority, for example. It's a publicly owned and operated electric utility that provides much of the electricity for Appalachia area. It was part of his reforms that created that. It's called an informal economic government of the United States. And, he was really successful in transforming the physical plant of our country and spending a lot of that money on actual infrastructure. So we do have a plan, so to speak, that we could build from, or history that we can look to start pulling back and taking control of that.
Yeah, where there are natural monopolies, they should be. Utilities are a great example of that. Historically, during the populist era of the Farmers Alliance and the like, more than a century ago, a lot of the interurbans and transportation and electricity, when it first got started, was all publicly owned. And people in California know that those communities that are not under PG&E, that are publicly owned, like in Sacramento and I think in LA and elsewhere, they haven't had the problem. They don't pay the same rates, and they haven't had the same problems as those that are under PG&E. And look what the hell's happened in Texas with their whole system that has been privately operated. It's a disaster. So there are things that are natural monopolies should be public.
Yes, it's cost people's lives. How we can't hold them criminally responsible, these human beings that are causing these problems, is still part of it. That's why we need the We the People Amendment.
That's right. Former Cleveland Mayor Tom Johnson, big proponent at the time, of about a century ago, once said, I believe in the municipal ownership of all public service monopolies, for if you do not own them, they will in time own you. They will corrupt your institutions and destroy your liberties. And, he hit it dead
He
on.
wasn't wrong.
Dead on. And so, here may be an opportunity to do that. Well, we're sort of coming up near the top of the hour. I wonder if there's anything else that we should really try to get in. Any particular, I don't know, good news that comes across. Anything that strikes you?
Good news. I don't know. Washington State voted to ban for-profit prisons.
That's good.
That's the only thing I can think of.
That's very
How
good
about
news.
you? Well, and of course, HJR 48 getting reintroduced with 50 initial co-sponsors.
That'd be very good news. Just to spend a minute here going over some comments. Sorry we haven't kept up with them. Thanks, Alfonso, for throwing some of the more pertinent ones here. Is Florida rule also to blame for the Florida toxic leaking? Good question. I don't know. Hey, if you had a guess, at the very least, probably, poor regulatory apparatus. They weren't regulated closely enough or rigorously enough.
Actually,
all,
they knew in 1970 that that's a problem. It's an it's imminent fail now, but they have known for 50 years that was a problem. They've chosen to spend their money on other things. I mean, DeSantis at this point is focusing on criminalizing protests instead of protecting the citizens of Florida from toxic leaking and, a pandemic. None of these things matter. What's important is nobody's allowed to speak up against them or speak out against them, or they will be punished.
So are you saying that rather than spending resources and attention to addressing issues like toxic leaking of plants and facilities, let's put our energy into passing laws that criminalize people who are protesting against companies that are involved in toxic leaking?
You got it. That's exactly what's happening.
Makes perfect sense, huh? Makes perfect sense. Again, just yet another illustration and example of how the laws and the rules and even the Constitution are set up to defend and protect property over people, not to mention the natural world. And I see in the comment section there were a few, somebody who heard our comments from last week over Chevron going after the attorney Donziger, asking, would HJR 48 remedy this in future instances? Well, to the extent that corporations like Chevron would not have the political power that they now have in court and in Congress to shield themselves from accountability and from having laws and rules that allow them, as they did, to pick up and move the court where this was heard from New York to Ecuador. Certainly that would apply.
Well, it started in Ecuador, and he won the biggest settlement in history. So,
but I think
Exxon started suing him in New York, sued them
in New
York.
And then they went to Ecuador
New York too,
thinking that, it'll go for us. Chevron did, and it turned. It actually, the judge, who they thought they could buy off, they could, get the courts and all, turned against them. So then they just picked up, all their assets and just left the country. Mm-hmm. So just horrific. You did not cite the specific constitutional rights used and abused to make a convincing case to our representative. We need to know the specific in the Donziger case. Well, again, the overall, this was about using and abusing their power, their influence in the courts. Specifically, though, maybe the closest one that would come to it would be First Amendment political free speech rights, to be able to ensure that they were effective in lobbying to protect themselves, to allow them to continue to operate the way they do. Because quite honestly, we could pass laws in this country that could prevent, that could limit, that could regulate companies from engaging in actions like this. Even though they're overseas, you could provide some sort of tax, you could provide some sort of penalty, some kind of punishment for being bad actors abroad. But of course, that's not going to happen if these legislators are dissuaded because they are lobbied, because they are given campaign contributions to not even think about, let alone introduce such kind of legislation that limits the ability to move their resources, their plants, their equipment, their assets, and by extension, their court case.
Right.
All
And
right.
the judge ordering Gonzinger to give his to turn over all of his computer and electronics to the oil company. To me, that's just mind blowing. Just mind blowing.
Yeah. And well, the other thing is, if we had true First Amendment if we had abolished Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights for corporations, okay, which was once the case, you could, like what happened, I am most familiar with Ohio because I did research in Ohio looking at the relationship between corporations and citizens. And at that time, sorry, corporations, in particular banking, and I can't imagine why banks in particular were of such concern to legislators, but banks in particular were forced every single month to, for so many days of the month, open their books for public inspection. They had to have their books basically in the lobby of the bank, of their main branch. Imagine if things like Enron Corporation were forced to do something like that. We might not have had that scandal. Or if, some of the more recent, those that were involved in the 2007, 2009 financial scandal were involved in having to have their books open. Well, imagine if Chevron was forced to have its books open, that we had access to some of their internal emails pertaining to, them trying to influence what's going on. Sure, companies should have certain proprietary rights regarding their invention or their economic activity. But when it comes to their political activity like this, we should be able to get access to that. Now, how you actually write the law to do that, hey, that's something that people with much greater legal minds than I have do. But being able to declare and assert Fourth Amendment search and seizure protections should not exist.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, as you mentioned, yeah, we're at the top of the hour here.
What's coming up for the week?
Well, there's ways to get involved with Move to Amend if you're interested. You can join our campaign for the 117th Congress to move the 117th Congress to amend. Our goal is to get another 50 by the end of the month, so we do need your help. You can go to movetoamend.org/117campaign. There, Alfonso, thank you so much. And join us.
Right. You can also sign our petition, movetoamend.org/motion. This is not just something that is done just to, because it's busy work. But when you sign that petition, you are adding your name. And please, if you do, at least give your state and city and zip code so that when we do lobby congressional members, we can say you are whatever, if you are from the Illinois 6th Congressional District, we can say that X number of people from the Illinois 6th Congressional District, you being the congressperson from Illinois 6th Congressional District, are in support of you, congressperson so-and-so, becoming a co-sponsor. There are this many potential votes out there, this many potential people who will support this position of yours. So please do help us reach what we're trying to achieve here in the very short term is 500,000 supporters. We're getting very close, so help us out. MoveToMend.org/motion.
Yeah, and check and see if you've signed it yet. You may have been a longtime supporter of Move to Amend and just haven't signed the petition or the motion yet. So give it a look, see if you've got your name, have your vote down, so to speak, that you support the We the People Amendment and moving forward. Also, we have another great way to get involved and to really learn about movement building is our movement education program. This is not like any other. And this is also the first year that we've opened it up to beyond just Move to Amend members and their affiliates. So it's now being hosted as well on the Radical Guide. But this is a way to really dig in and to look at historically what has inhibited movements from being successful or slowed them down in their in achieving their successes. You can find that at movetoamend.org/education3. And you can treat it as a book club or whatever, have you and a couple of friends look at it, come together, discuss it. Again, Radical Guide, shout out to them for hosting the new movement education program. You're just not going to find anything else like this. It should be offered as a civics component in every high school and every university, in my humble
Great
opinion.
Resource. Great resource.
Really is.
Yep. And lastly, feel free, please, we invite you to help us out financially by going to movetoamend.org/donate. Those of you who may be receiving, if you haven't yet, but plan to, if not already been automatically deposited in your bank account to the American Rescue Plan stimulus check, if it's upwards of the full amount of $1,400, and you can afford any amount of it, please do consider sending some of it our way. What's a mere 1/14th? A mere 1/14th would be $100. So if I can be respectfully so bold as suggest that, if not more, if you can help us out, we don't get money, really any money from big corporations or billionaires or government or foundations or from political parties. So we depend on people at the grassroots like you. So if you can help us out even 1/14th of what it is you receive, that'd be terrific. So thank you so much for considering any amount, whatever it is, whether it's that, less, or more. Really do appreciate your support in every single way. So I think that will be it. Next week on this time and place, it's George Friday and Keon Bliss. Join us then for Making Sense, and hopefully they'll make sense, maybe even better than we try to. So apologies if whatever we said was a bit on the confusing side, at least from my perspective. You did a terrific job, Jenny, and thanks again, Alfonso, for keeping us on track. So until next week.
Thank you, Alfonso. Thank you, Greg. And thank you all for all that you do.